This is Dave Arnold, your host of Cooking Issues, coming to you live from the heart of Manhattan at Rockefeller Center on Newsstand Studios. Joined as usual, but not in the studio. She's probably chilling on the coast of Connecticut. Nastasia the Hammer Lopez, how you doing? Doing all right?
Hi. I'm not feeling good.
You're not feeling? Oh, that's too bad. Quinn will not be with us today because he is also not feeling well. That's unfortunate. But we do have Jackie Molecules in California. How you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah?
Good, fresh off my backpacking trip.
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about, remember, we go through it now, we introduce a special guest, and then we shoot the breeze.
Yes.
Right?
And then we shoot the breeze.
Rocking the panels here, we have Joe Hazen, as usual. How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing well. You're looking good.
Yeah, really?
You're not looking that sweaty either today.
Really?
Yeah.
That's bizarre.
He was when he showed up.
Oh, okay. Well,
He's
I didn't know if you don't know. I forgot to tell you, but the AC is down today.
Yeah. Well, I used a special trick. I kept my shirt unbuttoned on the bike up here and then buttoned it when I got close. Maybe that's what it is.
Oh, the Hasidics don't like that.
And of course, we got John. How you doing?
Doing great, thanks.
Yeah?
Yeah, peachy.
Yeah. Oh, you're doing as great as you
I
were
can.
willing to talk about on the air.
I mean, there's water dripping in the kitchen at the restaurant right now, and it's stressful. But there's nothing I can do, so no point in being there. I'm not a plumber.
All right.
So.
Oh, well, que sera, sera.
Well, I don't know. That's what the owner reminded me. I was like, do I need to bail on the radio show to go deal with this? And he was like, no, there's nothing you can do. And he's like, you're right. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I like that.
And before, I apologize. We shot the breeze prior, right? Our special guest today, I'm super excited. I've only met once, but she has a new book out. It's Rose Levy Beranbaum, the author of all the cookbooks. Any cookbook with the word Bible attached to it that's worth reading, you've written. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you, and thank you for adding that's worth reading, because since the first cake Bible, since the first Bible, there have been bagel Bibles. Everybody took that name because they thought that was the secret for success.
Right, well, it turns out you also have to write the book that's worthy of the name Bible. It's also like when people say the complete X, Y, or Z, and you can lift it, you're like, not really, though. You know what I mean? Like the complete whatever it is. But I mean, I think for those that don't know your work already, where have you been? And but you're well known for being thorough and exhaustive, and also, but never exhausting, and always writing a lot of very detailed instructions and testing your recipes. Would you say it's accurate?
I would say that I would add reliable, because that's what people keep saying. They know that when they do a recipe, it's going to work.
Yeah.
And can you imagine the pressure of having that name Bible and having to live up to it? I dictated the entire manuscript into a tape recorder and played it back against the first version to make sure that there wasn't a single mistake in it. And there wasn't.
Wow. So what word does your dictation software get wrong the most?
Well, I should be using dictation, but I tend to I'm a typist. I type 180 words a minute. It's very hard to use dictation.
Oh my God.
Why? How many things dictation gets a lot of things wrong, so that's why I steer away from it. But the older I get, the more I think, I better preserve my fingers. Typing like that can really wear you out.
Well, our mutual friend Harold McGee uses dictation software. I believe he uses whatever one is called Dragon, whatever it is, Dragon Stone, Dragon, whatever it is. That's what he uses.
No, it's Dragon. My late husband designed the entire program and vocabulary for radiology, and he kept encouraging me to use it, and I did. But now on Word and with the Mac, you can't. It's not compatible, and their dictation you can't teach really, so it's not quite as good. But what I do is I don't dictate. I type and then I read out loud, and that makes a huge difference. My husband, Woody, and I read back and forth. And when you dictate, you speak differently from when you type. But the combination, I think, is the best of all.
Huh. And let me ask you this. What program do you like to type into these days?
I'm using Word.
Yeah, me too, but everyone hates it.
That's what works for me.
So, and when you type...
I know, I don't understand why.
Everyone hates it. I don't know why, whether it's because people are doing more collaborative work now and Word sucks for collaborative work, but McGee uses Scrivener, right? But just, I don't know, I can't be bothered to use some sort of specialty software. You know what I'm saying?
I do, and especially when you're used to something. I mean, I've written 13 books on this word. And by the way, I just saw Hal last week was when I was doing a book event at Omnivore, and he stopped in because he lives right nearby to say hello. There's a really nice picture on social media that I put. It's so great to see him.
Yeah, can I tell you an embarrassing fact?
So all three of us have in common.
I've never been to Omnivore Books. How embarrassing is that?
Well, are you on the East Coast?
Yes, but I mean, it's not like I've never been to the West Coast. You know what I mean? Like,
no, I didn't mean to imply that. I mean, it would be really criminal if you lived here and never went there. It would make sense. Your book is there, isn't it? I'll bet your book is there.
So John and I both felt terrible because we'd also, until last year, never been to Bonnie Slotnick's.
Wow, that too. What about Kitchen Arts and Letters?
All the time. Yeah, Matt comes on the show. I don't know, once every other month or so. He's our current. We used to have a segment called Classics in the Field where we would go over. We've mostly chose classics that people don't read as much anymore. So your books haven't come up. Because most people still read them, but things like that. By the way, for anyone listening on Patreon, call your questions to 917-410-1507. That's 917-410-1507. And John, why don't you tell them how to become a Patreon member?
Patreon.com/cooking issues. Go there. Oh, go for it, Rose.
Oh, I was just going to say that, speaking of classics, we're working right now on the complete new edition and revision of the Cake Bible for its 35th anniversary.
Ooh.
It's now 34th anniversary. So, yes, it's so much has changed in 30 years even. So, and it was 40 years ago I started writing it. So you can imagine the work it is, but it's worth it.
So
you have to have all new pictures, everything, but it'll be larger.
Right, but are you allowed to say that? Because then people are going to wait to buy the current book. Where you're eating into your own royalties here, because they can buy it and be like, oh no, and then they have to buy it right again. You know.
No, we talked about that, but actually, there's a lot of things that won't be in the new book that were in the old book, and a lot of people are saying, well, the two are going to be side by side, so I would encourage people to get it right away before it goes out of print. But there'll be a transition. I'm sure it'll be around for a while.
So give us a little taste. When you say things have changed, other than the ovens are different and / probably better, or at least different and more reproducible in some ways, what else do you think has changed?
I think what I'm most proud of, and I wrote an article for the LA Times Syndicate about 25 years ago, it was called Weigh to Bake. I think over 90% of baking books now are weighing. And the difference now between the original version and this one is that we've gotten rid of ounces completely. That was always so confusing because liquid ounces and weight ounces are not the same. Yeah. And so it's going to be a cleaner design, and since it'll be wider, we don't have to have the sidebar, we can have a more easy to follow kind of design. Yeah. But that's just one thing. I mean, ingredients have changed. The proportion of yolk to white in an egg has shrunk because they're using younger laying hens. And that makes a huge difference, say, in the Genoise, which needs the egg yolk, and they aren't separated. So we're actually separating all the eggs. Flour, they now have come up with what they call an unbleached cake flour, and it doesn't work for many of the cakes. So I was able to, in the current printing, actually add the word bleached in front of everyone. But I never had to write bleached cake flour because the only cake flour that existed was bleached.
Right. Well, I had a conversation with someone at King Arthur about this, and I asked them what they add to their cake flour to mimic the chlorination, which is what you need to keep the high ratio cakes up, obviously. Mm-hmm. And they add some sort of pre-gelatinized wheat starch to it, because they do add wheat starch to it. But you don't think it's effective enough, or is it brand by brand?
No, as soon as they came out with the latest version, I asked them to send it to me, and I was so disappointed. It looked like nothing, and I love King Arthur flour, but not the cake flour. The cake doesn't look like anything like it is on the box, even though I followed the instructions the way I'd expect people to follow mine. But what I advise them to do is what they do in England, and that's they heat treat the flour, and that's almost identical to the bleaching. The only difference is a slight difference in flavor because chlorine bleach gives a kind of floral quality, but the point is it has that fine texture, which it does not have in unbleached flour. Yeah, I've really thoroughly investigated this because the entire British Commonwealth can't use bleached flour. So it was someone named Kate Coldrick in the UK, in Devon, England, who actually tried the heat treatment that they do in industry and found that it worked. And I actually went with her. I went to work with her in England to see the difference between our flour and their flour. So that was a wonderful thing because people all over the world then were able to make cakes that rose to the same height and had the same fine texture. So, I call it cake flour.
So what's the procedure then for the bake out?
Well, I have actually a chapter in all of my books including the Baking Bible. What you do is, I can't tell you exactly how long, but you microwave it for a few minutes, and she says it's best to let it sit overnight because it loses some of its moisture, but it still would work. And then it's just like another flour, like a bleached cake flour.
Huh. Interesting. Do some
Very
research.
Simple.
I will do some. I will do some research.
Well, she was wondering why her cakes came out so much lower than mine, and then she started checking what they do in industry because the cakes that you purchase commercially were fine, and she found that that's what they do. They heat treat, and I think they've made it available now to the consumer in England, which is wonderful.
I wonder why they can't use chlorine over there. One of those EU. Well, it's not EU anymore, but.
Well, our USDA is so strict that you would think that they wouldn't allow it if something was bad, and chlorine dissipates. So I don't really understand, but I don't get into the politics of it. I just do what works, and I'm glad that we can still have it.
I mean, it's added to half of our water supplies. I think the issue
Good point.
I think that the issue is that there's such a revulsion against the level of intervention in something like flour and how far it's gotten away from wheat as a thing that they're throwing away the baby with the bathwater. And I would bet that 99 out of 100 people don't understand that the bleaching isn't just about, because there's other ways of bleaching as well, right? That don't have the effect that you and I want, right? It's chlorine bleach specifically isn't just about making the flour white. It's about increasing its ability to hold water so that you can do a high ratio cake, right? So because
True, and emulsify ingredients.
Right. So because I see it as a functional ingredient, there's nothing at all bad about it. But whereas people see it as like, oh, white flour is bad flour, therefore if it's whiter, it's more bad. I think that's what it's from. I don't know.
Well, and also there's the whole political issue of GMO. My current editor wouldn't even allow to put GMO. I had to say, what is the other word when something is organic for these cornstarch? And actually, Rumford is not organic; it's GMO, and that's why it works better in the genoise. It makes it a finer texture. Using the right amount of egg yolks and the non-GMO cornstarch, you get the finest texture. And this all began because somebody wrote to me saying, all of a sudden her genoise was coarse, and it never had been. And I thought, okay, well, I don't know what she's doing, but how can I know? And then it happened to me on a 12-inch wedding cake, genoise. And that's when I got in deep and found out it was the lack of the full amount of the egg yolk, and it was using non-GMO cornstarch that would help.
Well, so I wonder, I'd have to look at it, what the difference in the starch, because also that's another thing nobody really thinks about is the actual structure of starch granules being different from starch to starch. You know what I mean? It's like something that people, I don't know.
Yeah, this is the thing. And the baking powder, the aluminum baking powder, you might not notice in a cake, but in a pie crust, if you use aluminum-based baking powder, which is more commonly available, it gives a nasty taste. I remember we were doing a photo shoot for the Pastry Bible, and Maria Guarnaschelli said, "This tastes awful." And I said, well, I asked Roscoe Betzel, who was the stylist, I said, what kind of baking powder did you use? And he said, just the regular one, Argo, whatever it is. And I said, that's it. And in a cookie, you can really taste that. Because there's so little else going on. With a cake, there's so many elements, maybe you can get away with it, but not with cookie or pie crust.
So speaking of cookies...
A lot of people don't even use baking powder.
Speaking of cookies...
In a pie crust, because...
Yeah, I don't use it either.
Go ahead.
You use it? You like it? I don't use it much. I try to do everything to keep it as not puffy as possible. I dock the heck out of when I blind bake, I don't, I dock the hell out of it so that it doesn't puff up, because I don't use pie weights. I hate pie weights. I hate them.
I don't do that. Well, yes and no. I sometimes use pie weights because I don't want, for example, I'm making a pecan pie, I don't want to have any holes that may not seal up because they'll stick ruthlessly to the bottom of the pan, the plate. But yes, but with cookies, in order to keep them from puffing up, and Hal would agree, I'm Harold McGee, that if you use baking, if you use unbleached flour, then it ties up more of the water and doesn't puff as much and also doesn't spread as much. And cookies are very simple, but there's so few ingredients. But to understand what the different ones do gives you control to get what you want. And a lot of people say, well, I want crunchy, I want flat, I want puffy. This is how you get it, by the few simple ingredients and how you use them. Like baking soda, it will make the cookies brown more and more quickly. It doesn't just take away acidity if you're using brown sugar. It's also used for browning. So there are a lot of interesting things to know. And, the thing is, people say cookies are so easy, and they are, except that compared to a cake, if you're making one batter, you just put it in the pan and it bakes. But if you're making cookies, you have to shape at least 12. So it's a little bit more labor-intensive, but they are more forgiving. Like you can take a pinch of dough off of it, the batch, and see, is it spreading too much? Do I maybe need to add some more flour? It's too sticky, or it's not sweet enough. I can knead in more sugar. Can't do that with a pie crust. It would become a cardboard pie crust.
Going back to leaveners and the British, you ever play around with ammonia-based leaveners and those thin cookies that they bake out dry so you can't smell the ammonia anymore? I've never tried it.
I did try it once, and I wasn't impressed with it. I'd rather use something that, is more like baking powder, baking soda, that where the combination is already done for you. I saw no difference, no benefit. And I have a lot of really skinny cookies in the cookie Bible.
Yeah, I wonder why they use it over there. Was it cheaper? Is it just what they're used to? Like, I never understood why bother getting into something that if you don't fully bake it out, it makes everything unpalatable. I never understood it.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't either, to be honest.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't have availability of the other stuff,
Maybe.
And also, it doesn't have a shelf life the way baking powder does.
Really? I guess it probably would, because it's volatile, right? So it'll go off. I mean, literally, go off.
It will if it's not stored. But baking powder, even if you store it tightly, after a year. That's why I always date mine. Will stop being as effective.
Well, one of the things you write in the Cookie Bible is that the volume to weight ratio of baking powder is very dependent on your humidity.
Did I write that?
You did.
I absolutely do not remember that.
Yes, you did.
Because these days, humidity is pretty well controlled in most places.
That's true.
I mean, I find here I am. Yeah.
What's your humidity? My average humidity is a lot lower than I thought because I have the air conditioner on in the summer. So my average humidity in my house is a lot lower than I would have expected, and my flowers therefore are a lot drier.
That's what I'm saying.
You know what I mean? Like, and because I'm writing a book now, supposedly, and I was kind of really worried about water in my dry ingredients, like how much moisture is there. So, I did a pretty careful measurement of, with very calibrated humidities, and it's quite a huge difference. And my house was a lot drier than I thought it was. Do you find that the average person's house is drier than they think it is?
Well, ThermoWorks now, they have this wonderful thermopen that is accurate to within a second. They also now have something that will measure humidity. But I don't go around to people's houses taking the humidity level, although it's tempting sometimes. But I've worked all over the country, and I have not found any difference really in how things work other than meringue. If it's really humid, there could be a problem with meringue. But that's something also that is, in addition to being proud of having converted people to weight over volume, is that also using the right amount of cream of tartar with egg whites, you'll never dry out the egg whites. All the instructions say beat until stiff but not dry, and if you dry them out, they break down so that you lose all your aeration in like an angel food or chiffon. But if you use 1/8 of a teaspoon of cream of tartar, which is an acid, to one egg white, which normally had been 30 grams or 2 tablespoons, each can beat till the cows come home. Well, the cows may not come home in a half hour, but I have beaten as long as a half hour, and it never breaks down. The thing is that if you don't weigh or at least take the volume, you're now getting more yolk, or more white, because if there's less yolk, that means there's more white. So that's one of the things that's really invaluable to know, because it makes a big difference.
And why do you prefer cream of tartar?
Probably combat humidity.
Right. Why do you prefer cream of tartar as opposed to other acids, let's say lemon juice, just because it has less of a flavor impact or easier to dose for you, or?
Not that it's easier to dose, but that it's the right level of acidity. And it's just as natural. It's a byproduct of the winemaking industry.
Well, I'm for
it's
it.
It's not an unnatural kind of chemical. Yeah. Yeah, it works, and I've found that it never gets old. In other words, it doesn't dissipate.
But you've also...
Lemon juice would probably work too, but you're right. It would give it flavor, and I don't necessarily want that.
And you wrote that, though, if you add either too little or too much, it doesn't stabilize it. There's a very sharp kind of peak of stabilization that's right around that level of added acid, correct?
Well, this is the thing. I tested, and I kept increasing it little by little, and at a certain point, it went the other direction, and it didn't help. But that's another issue, is that no two sets of measuring spoons is the same. So you have to have a little bit leeway. The one thing that really changes the weight by measuring is baking powder, I've discovered. And the only way you can get an actual total standard is either by weighing or by sifting it into the spoon, and then it's always the same. But salt is always 6 grams per teaspoon. Baking soda is always the same, 5.5. But baking powder varies, and it's not because it settles. Maybe it does. I just have never gotten to the bottom of it. And that's why I have a really fine scale for weighing. At least I can set the standard.
Yeah, what brand of salt do you use, by the way? What's your go-to salt?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me that, because I can never understand why people would use kosher salt for baking. I use a fine sea salt. I always say, well, you're not closer to God because you're using kosher salt. I mean, it's great for when you're salting chicken or meat, but not for baking. I
use it.
And I use Balan, but any fine salt.
Right. I use it for everything because it's what I have. You know what I mean? I only stock kind of finishing salts and Diamond Kosher, but I get your point. And so, because also, like, on a stovetop, kosher is so much easier. I mean, I get your point with baking, but, on a stovetop, kosher is so much easier to dose than, if you're just doing it by hand. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Exactly.
Right. So what I do is I always dissolve my salt in the liquids. And I never put the salt in with the solids. I guess that's the way I get around it. But it would be
brilliant.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, because otherwise I was going to say it would be hard to distribute evenly. But dissolving it in the liquid is a perfect solution.
Yeah. That way I don't have to
impressed. I hadn't thought of that.
Well, you know who thought of it is Monroe Boston Strauss. Who
at Pie Marches On.
Yeah. And then,
Do you want to hear something really funny about our mutual friend, Harold McGee?
Sure.
I wrote to thank him some years back about thanking him for coming up with a wonderful technique of rolling the butter with the flour in a zip seal bag to flatten it out to make pie crust more flaky, which works beautifully. And you know what he wrote back? You were the one who taught me that. That's hilarious.
That's funny.
I mean, here are all these people not giving credit and acknowledgement for what they've learned from other people, and here we are trying to pass it to each other.
Well, that's something I notice in your writing is you always take some time to say where you got a recipe from or where you got an idea from. And there was a period where people, I don't think, were doing that as much, but I find that in the long run, in the long term, it makes the world a richer place for people to reach back in their writing, and that allows it just allows for. I like to think of like a scholarship of a recipe or of a technique, and it just is so generous to say where something came from, and also makes, I think, the writer look smarter, saying that this is where they got it from. Don't you? Or no?
I love that you said that. That's the way you said it. It's so beautiful. Yeah, that's the kind of history I'm interested in. We all build on each other. I mean, if I try to think about something I really invented from scratch, I do have one thing. It's chocolate rolled fondant, which is now being produced commercially in Australia. But there was no such thing. There was plastique, which wasn't worth eating. But I didn't create fondant. I based that on a white fondant. So, yeah, I mean, there's nothing that people invent totally. So it's really interesting to see where things come from, how they evolve, and how they change when the ingredients change or the technique changes.
What do you think? I know I can almost I'm guessing what you're going to say, but like the current way that people learn cooking. I was talking to somebody, randomly, right, and they were like, "Oh, everyone just gets their information off of YouTube and TikTok now. Everyone can know everything," and I was like, "Oh my god."
Yeah. Everything has become much smaller, is all I can say.
Yeah.
First of all, TikTok is great for quick tips, and I love tips. But for recipes, I wouldn't go there. I mean, the thing is that initially I thought that video was the way to go, and I did video, and I had a PBS show. But the best way is really seeing it step by step. And only one of my books, Rose's Baking Basics, has step by step for every recipe. And even I like to look at those steps and, oh, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to look like at that stage or this stage. But if you're trying to do a video, you have to keep stopping it with your sticky fingers. Oh, I missed that part. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, yeah, and I also like what you said that you go back and look at your own stuff, and I think people. I mean, you've been writing books since 1981, right? Roughly since 1981, and so when you've been doing something at a high level for a long time, it's like when you're cooking in a restaurant. Like you get really good at a particular dish and your hands and your brain and everything is tied together. And then if you don't do it for 5-10 years, it's not that you've completely forgotten it, but you're not at the same place. And it's unreasonable to think that anybody could stay at the same place forever without doing it all the time. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I've often thought of that because people say, well, it's your recipe. Why didn't you remember it? After 13 books, and they're big books, I can't remember my recipes. Maybe some of them I do. But during COVID, I did so much cooking that I actually did remember a lot of things. What's more, it was kind of liberating because I didn't have to follow what I'd written. At one point, I said, well, it says blah, blah, blah. And I thought, wait a minute, it's me. I'm the one who can change it. I don't have to follow,
Although you are very clear that, and this is something that anyone who writes recipes has to worry about. At least make it once the way it's written. Just make it once the way it's written, please.
That's exactly what I say.
Yeah.
And if you want to substitute, at least substitute just one ingredient. You'll really appreciate this, having had the same editor as I, Maria Guarnaschelli. We were at the Macy's de Gustavus. I was doing an event, and her husband, John, came along, and somebody stood up and asked the following question: can you substitute something for the banana? And I said, in the banana cake? And before I could say anything more, I feel like, why make the banana cake? John pipes up with, watermelon. And it was just the perfect New York squelch. The first thing you learn, and isn't that perfect? The first thing you learn in basic science in high school, even in junior high school, is the variable. Don't do more than one variable at a time, because otherwise you don't know what is creating the effect that you're getting.
Yeah, it really depresses me when I read...
I don't like that word substitute.
Yeah, when I read reviews of recipes, and either they hated it and they subbed out half the recipe, or they loved it and they subbed out half the recipe. I'm like, neither, please. You know what I mean? It's just... Somebody
recently just wrote to me that which of our cookies in the Cookie Bible are my favorite that aren't as sweet as other ones. I go, oh, God. The thing is that I don't like cookies that are too sweet. None of them is too sweet, except for meringues. And like a macaron, I never liked them because they're so sweet. But Thomas Keller came up with a wonderful concept of making mousseline buttercream as a kind of barrier with lemon, the lemon curd version of it, and the lemon curd in the center. So it really mitigates against all that sweetness. So what I came up with is an answer. First of all, the peppercockers have a lot of spice, so you don't get a sense of these are too sweet. But the ones that really aren't too sweet at all are the jumbles, because they have just a bare amount of dough, enough to hold together all the nuts. And nuts aren't sweet. Wow. If anything, they're a little salty, which is nice. But it was hard to answer. At first I thought, okay, I'm not answering. And my husband Woody said, well, you have to answer, because we answer everybody. Yeah, and that's the benefit of having a blog, because every book has errors in it. I mean, it has a really interesting production error. One of my favorite recipes is the oatmeal cookies. And, I had the volume is correct. I think it's 1.5 cups. But the weight was 90 grams, and it was correct in the galleys. Not everybody knows galleys is the first stage that they send out for advanced copies.
And they're maddening. They're maddening. They're maddening. So much is wrong in a galley, and they don't want to change anything.
I know. Yeah. Well, wait until you hear what happens. So then the hard copy and the PDF comes out, and the 90 grams becomes 52 grams. Nobody can figure out how or why. So you wring your hands. But there is the benefit of having a blog where you can put errata, which we now have changed to corrections because people thought it was a porn thing. It's not erotic; it's errata, which means error in Latin.
Although I guess we could combine them. We could do a combination of the two and something. So this reminds me of a funny story. I won't call out the actual author, but Nastasia and I have a mutual friend who, when they did the galleys, they put in the low-res images into the galleys. Okay, wait for it. Stas, you know what I'm going to say, right? I'm not going to say who it is. But
don't give away.
I won't give away who it was. But then for the first printing, they actually printed it with the low-res JPEGs. So it looked like a high school science report circa like 1998. And I was like, yeah, publishing people. Publishing.
Yeah. I didn't see that one, and I get a lot of cookbooks, you can imagine.
Yeah, that was depressing. The other thing that, again, Stas, don't worry, I'm not going to say who it was, but like, he is also extremely meticulous person. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know, I think it almost killed him. Anyway, I'm pretty sure it almost killed him. So, Interesting.
But at least the recipes will still work.
Yeah, right. It's just no one will bake them because they're going to be like, why is it so fuzzy? I'm not going to bake that. It's too fuzzy. You know what I'm saying? People are the worst. I mean,
actually, that happened in one of my books too. I can't even remember which. I think it was the Pastry Bible, and not in the first printing, but somehow they came out fuzzy. And you know what happened with the Cake Bible is that I was going to send it to Oprah. I did send it to Oprah Winfrey because she was considering getting married at that time, to offer to make her cake, and I signed it, and I opened it up pretending I was Oprah to see how she would feel, and it was upside down. Everything was upside down.
No, jeez.
So anything can happen in publishing. Don't blame the author, always.
Oh, I know. And then on Amazon, if that happens, they're like, book was printed upside down, 1 star, and you're like, come on, people.
Exactly. They make your book look, people. Yeah, they can ruin you.
Yeah. For no reason, for no apparent reason. There was a book that I saw. That had like the first printing was wrong, and if you look at their Amazon review, and then people don't buy the book because of the Amazon review because no one reads to see why it has a low Amazon review. I like to do that because I love to hate poorly done reviews. Like I love to go on Amazon. Find reviews that I find are made by execrable, stupid people and just go to town on them. And my wife's like, again, Dave? Again with the reading the Amazon reviews? And I don't do it on my own because that would be too heartbreaking, but I do it like on other people's work and it's just like, you know?
Oh, I've got to tell you the funniest one ever, awful one that I ever got was the woman who said she threw the Cake Bible in the garbage, and then her moniker was Horse Lady, and I couldn't resist. I wrote, my comment back was, if I were a horse, I sure wouldn't want you on my back. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't help it. And they had Amazon at Willie Morrow said, Rose, never put something negative. Take it right off. Never respond in a negative way. But, sometimes I get my sense of humor gets the better of me. And, of course, she criticized me for being inappropriate. So,
yeah. You say that you throw, my work in the garbage and I can't say anything negative back. Doesn't make sense. It is not smart to do, though. Whoever your contact was correct in that it's not, in general, best not to engage. But on the other hand, I don't, crap on that person. Crap on Horse Lady. That's all I'm going to say. I don't know who it is.
But I have to tell you that somebody else who criticized me and told me I should cut my hair and have a mole removed on my face. And, I wrote to her. I mentioned that Nigella Lawson has even longer hair and that, that this is... I just answered her in a nice way, and she turned out to be my greatest ally.
Wow.
It turns out she was in South America, and she loved my work. And, so it's true. It's a truism, but it really works. That if you can respond with kindness, maybe you have a better chance of getting a good response back, but you'll never get a good response back with a negative.
Right. Why did she care about the length of your hair? Like, why was that even germane to like your cookbook writing skills?
Because she thought as a baker that it wasn't appropriate to have hair that might get into the baking. But the problem is that if you have short hair, you can't see when it gets in the batter. But if you have long hair, it's very obvious. So it's almost an advantage.
Yeah, ding, 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 ding. Yeah. Like,
so people want to look. They just want to criticize. They have to find something to find fault with.
Ain't that the truth?
Some people, that is.
And nowadays, basically, I feel it's even more hardcore because it's much easier to criticize something than it is to like actually understand and say something constructive or nice. And so there's just so much criticism out there because it's just so much easier. Criticism is so much easier.
And people enjoy reading that more too.
Yeah. So before we talk more Cookie, I have a lot of Cookie to talk to in the next 24 minutes and 39 seconds. But I want to hear a little bit about this. So you wrote for, up until like 2002, 2003, 2004, right? So we're talking about you've already done Cake Bible, you've already done Pastry Bible, you've already done or had almost finished at least Bread Bible, and all by yourself. I'm not going to say no one's an island, but you know what I mean? Like not with a collaborator. And then all of a sudden you start corresponding with this guy, Woody Wolston, and becomes your collaborator. And now, after your husband passed in 2019, now you're married and collaborating. Like, what's that like? Like after you've already done so much work, to have a collaborator with you, what is that like?
I never would have expected that I could trust somebody on that level. And when I first met him, he baked wonderful cakes from the book. He actually brought 2 that he'd made, but he didn't really have the knowledge of baking the way I do. So he was totally trainable. It reminds me of when I went to study at Wilton cake decorating, and I never squeezed anything out of a pastry bag, and they said, this is great. You'll learn the Wilton way, that you don't have to unlearn stuff. So over the years, he kept getting better and better, and what a miracle it is to have somebody who can actually help me do stuff and come up with things and have a different point of view, who excels at Excel. I have a horror of the spreadsheets. I mean, he offers a lot of things that I wouldn't have. And I remember when I worked for Dr. Goodbody many years ago, that's Mary Goodbody's father. And she's one of the people, she and Chris Kimball started Cook's Magazine. And when I worked with him, he said, marriage is the double-barreled approach to life. And I'm not one who shoots guns, so I didn't know what he meant. So I asked for a definition. And he said that you have a larger vision than just looking through your own personal one. So working with Woody now, I don't think I could do that revision for the Cake Bible. It's too massive if I didn't have him to work with. It's just the greatest gift to have this.
Huh.
And of course, when we were about to finish, it was about to go to press, the Baking Basics, I think it was, or the ice cream book, or no, maybe it was the cookie book. Anyway, the point is that it was about to go to press, and they said, you cannot make a single other change or correction. And I said, Woody, this is it. It's our last chance. And I wrote to the editor, well, I do have one more to make. And that's instead of saying to Woody, my assistant or my associate, I want to add, and now my husband. And I got the response back, wow. So that must be the Cookie Bible, because it's recent.
Wow. Well, congratulations. That's
and
awesome.
Here's how it happened. I mean, I felt like we were married by then, because before my late husband died, Elliot, he said to each of us separately, Woody, you should move in and take care of Rose. So it was just like a blessing that he gave, and a very loving thing, too. So Woody one day said, could I have a wedding ring? Could I get a wedding ring? And I said, here is my Honda key ring. And it was a perfect fit.
Wow.
And so the ring we designed for him is one like a key ring. I like the original one. It's kind of sentimental.
The Honda, yeah. I've lost. I don't take my wedding ring off when I cook or when I do anything, and yet I've lost. One of them was crimped around my hand and had to be cut off, and one I lost a lot of weight and I lost it in the surf. Another I lost literally milking a cow. So I'm like on my 4th ring. Isn't that weird?
You should have it. You should just have it tattooed on. I know somebody who does that.
That'd be easier. You know what I have now?
Yeah, I'm not into tattoos.
My brother-in-law, Wiley, Dufresne, chef, so he loves anything stainless. So he he turned me on to stainless steel rings. So my wedding ring now is stainless, very chef-friendly, stainless ring. Yeah. I mean, obviously gold.
I have a second one. I have my grandmother's Well, mine is from my grandmother's is from 1933. It's the circle of diamonds. And so I had one made to look like a key ring that's a circle of black diamonds. And then that ring finger, for some reason, started getting swollen. And I thought maybe black diamonds have a bad effect. I'm not sure it's good for the body to wear things full time. I mean, without ever taking it off.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Stainless is so inert.
So far, I haven't taken it off.
Yeah, I haven't lost this one yet.
That's why I'm thinking stainless is brilliant.
Yeah. Well, and also...
Where's Wiley living these days?
Wiley lives... he lives in... what's that neighborhood that's right to the west of Union Square? Like, right to the west. And it's not...
Chelsea, maybe? Chelsea.
Because it's kind of below Chelsea. It's... I don't know what the name of it is.
It's without name.
It's not. It's not Gramercy. It's below Chelsea. It's like, I don't know. He can walk to Union Square Green Market very quickly.
Sort of West Village, maybe. I mean, I've lived in that area almost all my life.
It's above
anyway,
that.
I love Wiley. Please say hello to him.
Yeah, I will.
Give him my best regards.
For those who know him personally, he lives in the house that he grew. He lives now in the apartment he grew up in. They bought it from his mom. So his mom decided to move up to Connecticut, so they live in that apartment now. So it's nice. It's nice. And my wife did the redesign for it because my wife's an architect. So keep it all in the family. Keep it all in the family.
Really?
Yeah.
It's so nice getting to know you here. I mean, we only met for 2 seconds, and now we actually have a chance to exchange some real information other than cooking.
So speaking of real information, so your first book, by the way, the first book that you wrote was Romantic and Classic Cakes, right? And it was for the Great American Cooking School series, which I don't own. It's one of those weird series I don't own. Why don't I own that series? We got to have that on Classics in the Field at some point. What do you think of that series?
Oh, Irena was amazing. She really gave me my dress rehearsal book of how to write a cookbook. In fact, I had submitted it single-spaced. That was before computers are the way they are today. I think it was a word processor, and she had to pay somebody to retype the entire thing. We were all learning. And I also learned to proofread without watching television at the same time, because there's one mistake. It was, I think the flour had to be 3/4 of a cup, and I had made it 1/4 of a cup. At least the volume, the volume wasn't correct, but the weight was correct. I think I had weights. I've always had weights. But Irena, I remember when I went to Dina DeLuca, and I said to Giorgio with great pride, I have a cookbook coming out, and maybe you'll carry it here. And he said, what is it? And I said, it's part of the Great American School Cooking series. And he said, oh, we don't carry series here. But guess what? They carried the series because it was so well done.
Yeah, well, and, I find, especially, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and I don't know, I stopped following it after that. Some of my favorite cookbooks are series, right? I mean, like, even if they're not really cookbooks, like Time Life series, everyone loves the Time Life series. Like, why would you be anti-series?
Yes, I have every one of those.
Yeah, because they're great.
He was kind of a snob, Yeah. But I can't fault him totally because they started something that was really unique and wonderful. I lived 2 blocks away from Dina DeLuca. I knew when I went in there my life would change. So, yeah. Well, he got over it.
Your books have outlived Dina DeLuca, so there you have it.
Good point. Yeah. Not all of them. My two savory books tanked. Yeah. I think I asked Julia Child if she thought I could write a savory book, if that would be accepted, and she said it's very hard to cross that border. She said some people have done it, but it's not easy, and she was right. And people treasure those 2 books. It's Melting Pot. I think you can get it for 50 cents on Amazon. Oh, and certainly Kitchen Arts and Letters. You can get any book that's been remaindered. They don't call the remainder. That's not a nice word, but Melting Pot and Celebrations are the 2 books.
No, check them out, people. Check them out while they're still cheap. We'll get all the people to buy them, and then they'll become collectible. But that series had some other.
Once you put something in print, it's always there. It's always out there, for better or worse.
Well, you know what I don't have a copy of, and I feel a little bit bad when I found out one of the things that was in it, and the pictures are on your blog. Your blog, by the way, is Real Baking with Rose, and you take questions in like month blocks and then answer them in month blocks. Is that how it works, or in like 2-month blocks?
No, we answer them within 48 hours, except when we're on book tour.
Oh.
And even then, we've been answering questions like that low sugar one.
Right, so you can ask You can ask questions and have them answered if you go to realbakingwithrose.com. So you had your original...
we do that because out of generosity. But the thing is that it benefits us too, because we find out what things people need to know, what things people have a problem with. So it's a wonderful community of bakers actually all over the world. But where I had over 1 million a year, now it's down to so much less because everybody's doing the TikTok, the Reels, the Instagram, the Facebook. Yeah. But we're still keeping it because it's worth it to have a way to reach people and to have people reach us.
So you did I saw this only on your blog, but you did a cookie book, Christmas cookie book in, I don't know when, 91, 90, something like this. Mm-hmm. And in it you do...
91, you were good.
You do a gingerbread cathedral of Notre Dame. And you have a picture of it.
Well, Notre Dame...
Yeah.
Yeah, well, an architect actually did the drawings of putting it together. And when Notre Dame was burning, and it's my favorite structure in the universe, I actually posted that picture then.
Oh, that's me. Yeah.
You know what inspired it is that in the first place is that the stained glass cookies. I thought, what a wonderful rose cathedral window it would be. So I always thought I would do a cathedral with it, but I didn't even put it in the cookie Bible. I don't mean Notre Dame. I mean the stained glass cookies, because I've tried every conceivable candy and none of them melts without making holes in it.
Huh.
So the only way you could do it is with isomalt, which I don't even use. It's a cake decorating kind of thing, where it's the sugar and you can tint it. And if somebody was determined or wanted to enter a contest, and people have entered contests with using my recipe and my instructions without credit to me. Or you don't get credit when you enter for a contest. And somebody even won a second place ribbon someplace with it. I love when people are doing things, especially when kids use the book or any of my books and win 4-H fair prizes, and their parents tell me that. And the thing is, when my editor said I should do a book for kids, I said kids are doing a better job using my books than grown-ups because they follow directions. They don't think, oh, I know better, But then I said, I'll do a book for kids if you can give me step-by-step. I thought that would be the deal breaker. I want step-by-step of every recipe. And she said, sure. Wow. And that became Rose's Baking Basics.
Huh.
Funny how things happen.
Yeah. So speaking of decorations on cookies, let me get to some of my questions because I haven't even asked any questions. I haven't talked about Jack's backpack trip. I haven't done anything. I'm a bad man. But let's go. Maybe I'll go in reverse. On egg whites. You are very clear on egg whites that you like to crack them several days before you're going to whip them. Now, I know about, not using hyper fresh egg whites, right? And, interesting about eggs, the longer they are around, the more alkaline the egg white becomes. But what's the advantage of cracking out the whites a couple of days ahead of time?
I don't think I say that for every time you whip egg whites. It's just for the macarons that are so sensitive to everything. And I had learned when I studied at Le Notre.
Couple recipes you do.
Okay, because well, I'm going to now have to check because with the macaron, when I studied baking at Le Notre, and it was at the time not in Paris but in Plaisir, and they said older egg whites are the best, and you just leave them at room temperature for a week. Well, I found out with macaron there's such a thing as too old an egg white, and we're not talking about health issues here. We're talking about how they perform. So if they're too young and they're too viscous, it's harder to get as much. But there's a big controversy about that because if you use, for example, a cold egg white, it will be more stable, but it won't whip as quickly or maybe as high, but it won't break down as much. And, of course, using the cream of tartar obviates the whole problem. And don't shoot me, but you said if I use my AirPod, I might blank out. And sure enough, I got the second warning. But I have a second AirPod, so don't give up on me because if it does suddenly stop, I'll just plug in the other one.
Only for you. Only for you. All right, go ahead.
The AirPods are so great. You get such good quality.
All right. So
did you want to know anything else about my feelings for egg whites? The biggest issue is not getting a single trace of oil or fat on it. And if you even get a spot of egg yolk, you can suck it up. It's like a vacuum using the shell. It will take it out. But if it's a big blotch, there's no getting rid of it, and it will never whip. With all the cream of tartar in the world, it won't whip.
Well, and you also are a
so
fan of...
that's why you have to really rinse the glass.
You're a fan of the small bowl, white by white, then into the big bowl. That is the I think the only way to do it. And the clean,
yeah, because
clean
I remember once making a cake. Yes, a white cake with. Actually, it was a wedding cake, and so when I was on the 20th egg, that's when the yolk broke. I thought, that's it. I have to follow the rules.
That's it. Now you have to make some sort of putrid egg white omelet with it, some sort of horrible monstrosity.
You want to hear something else about eggs? I love duck eggs, but the whites don't whip well. So when I'm using something like a lemon curd, I'll use the duck egg yolks. Oh, my God, they're so flavorful, and the consistency is thicker. Yeah, try that.
Huh.
I even tried an ostrich egg because I was tired of separating all those eggs. And I thought, let me see. You only have to do it once. We have it on our, I think it's on the Instagram and Facebook, how Woody had to saw the egg in half. It's very hard to crack an ostrich egg. So he wanted to just drop it on the floor onto a sheet pan. But I said, but then the yolk will break, and then we can't test it. So we actually have all this written up. It was disappointing. I thought that would be the answer to having to crack all those eggs. But of course, the commercial industry, you can buy the egg whites or the egg yolk separately. I think you can get egg whites in the supermarket, but you can't get the yolk.
Well, you actually said that you don't mind whipping. You don't mind whipping box whites. You say they whip fine in your book.
Yes,
yeah.
Because they have acidity added. But the eggs that are pasteurized in the shell, this is very interesting for people who are immune compromised and for things that don't actually cook the eggs completely, is that if you use pasteurized eggs in the shell and you're using their egg whites, you have to use double the cream of tartar and whip longer, and it's more stable than any other egg white. Quite amazing. It took a while to get that. Get to the bottom of that.
How did the ostrich egg whites whip?
It was so disappointing, I can't even remember.
Yeah.
I think that wasn't the test, but I can't remember what it was that we were trying to do. I saw the egg yolk was so pale, and I was expecting it. Maybe it wasn't a free-range ostrich.
They're also multiply yolked.
I have to go back to.
So you still have to take more than one thing out because they're multiply yolked. I mean, yeah, they're kind of weird. They're a weird thing.
Really?
Yeah.
Mine wasn't.
Oh, I know some people did.
Mine wasn't multiple, but it was a gift from Miro. It was Kokovic, who was the pastry chef at Gramercy Tavern. He knew that I was dying to try it. So when we happened to go to the restaurant, and there was this box with a present, and it was an ostrich egg. So maybe it was a little old. That could have been why.
Everyone I know that has used them uses a Dremel with a cutoff wheel and then scores them with the Dremel all the way around and then washes the dust off before they crack. They're a pain, though. They are a pain. All right, now...
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, Hamantaschen, you solve the Hamantaschen problem. For those of you that don't know what the Hamantaschen problem is, the problem is that you either have to make a subpar dough or they spread out too much. So, what's your solution?
Yeah, I used to think they were like knishes, and I didn't like them either. I wanted a delicate one. But the solution, which sounds laborious, but it's so worth it because you have the best Hamantaschen in the world, is that you make little circles of discs of preferably heavy-duty foil that can be reused, and then you shape them with using the foil so that the corners stay up rather than flattening into a flat disc. I'm talking about the dough and the filling. It really works.
Now,
was that clear the way I described it?
Yeah,
you
definitely.
Put the dough on top, and then you form it with the foil.
Yeah, but the foil then ends up like a tri-corner hat or something, right? To hold it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it unmolds perfectly, and then you just rinse off the foil for the next piece.
Yeah. Now, I gotta ask. Your Madeleine recipe is based on a cake thing. It's not. First of all, you say that your Madeleines will last 3 days, and John's looking at me like I've got 3 heads because everyone knows you're supposed to bake them, eat them, bake them, eat them, bake them, eat them. And you can keep the dough, but you bake them and then you eat them. But you have a recipe you swear will last 3 days after it's baked, but it also doesn't use brown butter. So why don't you tell me about your whole take on the Madeleines here?
I remember having them at Restaurant Danielle, and you have to be a very special person or you don't get them at all. And when you get them, they had just came out of the oven. And yes, they get so stale and dry. So I have 2 solutions. One is to make chocolate ones and brush them with a syrup, and then they stay beautifully moist. And the other is not to use the classic Medellin batter, but to use the lemon poppy seed, which is one of my favorite cookies. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm just listening. Yeah.
Oh, good, because I just want to make sure when there's a silence that my AirPod hasn't decided to say goodbye, Rose. Okay. Mm-hmm.
But
is that what the answer you were looking for?
Yeah.
But I do love using brown butter. And in fact, in the chocolate chip cookie, not only do I brown the butter, but I use the brown milk solids and adds immeasurably to the flavor of the cookie.
Right. Yeah. I read a couple of the clarified butter recipes that you have. I can't remember which ones they are. Right. You know, when you clarify it, they go a little brown. Mm-hmm. What about people just subbing in ghee, which has even more of that brown milk solid flavor? Are you a fan or not a fan?
Well, I don't think ghee is as dark as I make it.
No.
I mean, my friend Shilpa, who is now the editor of Food Art of Bon Appetit, when we went to dinner at her and Miro's house, she gave me a whole jar of ghee because she had flavored it with curry leaves. Mm. But it wasn't. I'm in India. I don't find the ghee that. I never bought commercial ghee in this country, but I don't find ghee as dark.
Well, it's darker than clarified butter, but not as dark as brown butter. It's like in between. You know what I mean? In between ratio. I did just lose you there. Well, but if you can hear me while you're getting the other AirPod in, I have to get to the. Hi.
One second.
I got.
Dave, you'll carry it for a second, won't you?
I will, but I'm nervous that I'm not going to get to the 2 Patreon comments for Rose that, I want her to hear very nice things people have said. So she'll come back on. She'll come back on in a second. While we're waiting, Jack, Backpack, what's up? Jack,
sorry, I was unmuting. I'm here.
Which freeze-dried?
The big takeaway.
Which freeze-dried was supreme?
None, because here's the thing. We were like 12K elevation, and I did not realize that the water ratio on these packages would not be accurate. And so, we followed all the instructions exactly, and everything was just really soupy and not good. So my question to you is, why is that? What is it about the elevation that changes?
I would have guessed.
Oh, this is so funny.
Yeah.
I just heard you say my question. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, hi, yeah, we got you.
Okay, I missed the whole part before.
Oh, no.
I don't know why it took so long.
While you were swapping out, I was asking Jack about freeze-dried foods because he just went on a backpack trip and was trying a bunch of freeze-dried foods at altitude over 12,000 feet, and he said all the recipes came out very soupy. And I would have actually expected that they might not work right, but I would have expected actually the opposite because water boils off so quickly at high altitude that I would have guessed that you would have had to add more water. So that's kind of interesting.
Brought some Chinese MREs.
Unless it wasn't hydrating properly.
I did a class. I did a class for craftsy at high altitude.
Yeah, actually,
it's hard.
The Cookie Bible. The Cookie Bible.
Well, bread works well.
Cookie Bible says go to the USDA. Gives a bunch of places to go look for high altitude stuff.
Susan Purdy wrote a book, Pie in the Sky, and she actually went to 3 different altitudes. Almost had a divorce because she left her husband for so long to do it. I mean, this is noble. To the baking community. She wanted to actually see how things work at different altitudes. Otherwise, you can only speculate. You just can't know. It's like the proof is in the pudding. It was Cecily Brownstone of AP, who was my mentor, and she said, Rose, never be a typewriter cook. And as a typist, I thought, well, what's wrong with being a typewriter cook? I asked her a definition, and she said a typewriter cook is someone who thinks, okay, this will work. I don't have to test it. You always have to test it because you just never know.
So I want to read these things from our Patreon guests. This is from Will Robinson. Not a question, but if there's time to mention it, my bread journey started with Rose. I read the Bread Bible cover to cover in one sitting in the fall of 2013. I had just met my wife and needed to be cooler, so I taught myself how to bake in 2 weeks when she was at a conference. So basically, RLB changed my life. That's from Will Robinson. And then Chris Dat writes in, RLB was my entry into baking as a science. Her book is worn, stained, and ganache smeared. Until then, cooking was a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I was and am not an intuitive cook. I didn't get it. She introduced me to cooking I could study, measure, reproduce reliably, and be confident in my results. I am the cook I am today, a passionate amateur, and love cooking because of the Cake Bible. In 2017, I was diagnosed as celiac, a blessing for my health, but devastating for my passion. So now I'm a cook instead of a baker, but I'm learning to use precision, ingredient knowledge, and repeatable results as my guide. Thank you, RLB. Those are from our listeners.
Those are beautiful.
Oh, thanks. And then, don't thank them. And then in the little time we have left, we shared an editor and a person for a while, Maria Guarnaschelli. You want to leave us with some Maria Guarnaschelli, some choice Maria Guarnaschelli info on the way out?
Well, she was one of the most intelligent people I've ever known, but also, in her own opinion, one of the scariest. She said, yes, I'm crazy. Everybody knows I'm crazy. And one day, I was at the Gramercy Tavern where they have the annual pie contest, and her daughter, who I knew since high school, and since she was in high school, Alex Guarnaschelli, she stood up and gave her opinion in about 5 minutes without a single pause, a single and she said, I don't want people to be afraid of me the way but they are of my mother. And I said, you're the most articulate person. When I listen to you speak, and I speak to you, I feel like I'm stuttering. And she said, really? Because that's how I feel about you. So they say the apple didn't fall far from the tree, and she's also brilliant. But her daughter, Maria's granddaughter, is maybe the smartest of all of them. I follow her on Instagram. I just love her. So Maria left me with a great deal, and without Maria, there wouldn't have been a Cake Bible, and there wouldn't have been all these other books. How do you feel?
I loved her, and Nastasia also loved her. Nastasia, I think, loved her especially because she did scare the crap out of me, in a good way. You know what I mean? And maybe, now that she's gone is the reason I haven't come out with the second book so far. Who knows? Who can know? But she definitely was one of a kind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I was with some friends after Omnivore, Celia Sack and Diane Jacob, and she said they told me that one day they were sitting with a bunch of people, including Flo Breaker, who sadly isn't alive anymore, and each person had some bad story to tell. And they said, you're the only one who has a kind word for Maria. Well, yes, there were only 2 moments where I let her have it because I'd been so, appreciative of who she was. And she said, I'm sick and tired, Rose, of me being the monster and you always being Pollyanna and saying the sweet things. Tell me what you really think. And I said, are you going to interrupt me if I do? Because that's what she would do. And she said, no, I'll listen. And I said, working with you is like being subjected to hazardous waste.
Wow.
Well,
wow.
She didn't know that was in me. I didn't know that was in me. But after something like 10 years of taking her verbal abuse, which, she gave so much, but she also let you have it, even if you didn't deserve it. She was filled with anger. And, that was, everybody knows that about her. And I think she believed that in order to be a genius, you had to be that way. I don't agree. She sure was a genius.
Yes, she was.
And there was a lot of love between us. Yeah.
We have been talking with Rose Levy Beranbaum about her new book, The Cookie Bible, and a bunch of other things. Rose, thank you so much for coming on. Maybe sometime you come on again.
I'd love to meet you in person.
All righty. Cooking issues.
We should figure that out.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Nasty.
Thank you.
Nasty. I'm mispronouncing your name. Forgive me. Okay.